I don't want to disturb your listeners who are going to go to bed after watching you, but I think we're 3 steps from war with Russia.
Ukraine's former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko threatens to level Russia to the ground. This came in a leaked phone conversation with another former official that emerged on YouTube. This comes as the United States government debates a loan guarantee for the country's new leadership.
I'm sorry, if you're saying privately behind the scenes that you're cooking up a deal, and then you're saying publicly that this is up for Ukrainians to decide, those are 2 totally different things.
Now, the question is, who's provoking this unrest? And you know, what I know is that you really have to stick close to the evidence. And in this case, we have incredible evidence based on an intercepted telephone conversation. And who's speaking? Well, it's the Assistant Secretary for European Affairs, Victoria Nuland, talking to the ambassador, our ambassador in Kiev. And what she's saying here, and I'll just read one sentence, Yatsenyuk, he's the guy. He's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy you know, I guess, as opposed to the guy you don't know. Now, guess what? A few weeks after that, Yatsenyuk has become the interim prime minister of the Ukraine. Well, if I were a Russian, I would look at that and say, who's responsible for a lot of this? Looks like they're trying to do with the Ukraine what they did to the rest of Eastern Europe, what the U.S. pledged not to do, and that is to pluck these countries off one by one and have them join not only the European community, but NATO. The Russians aren't going to stand for that. And, you know, the people advising Obama might have warned him that you go a bridge too far when you threaten strategic interests the Russians consider so sensitive as the Ukraine.
Here's the Kiev Post, the English-speaking newspaper in Ukraine, with this headline. General Dempsey says that the U.S. is ready for military response to Russia if Crimean conflict escalates. This was posted yesterday. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States General Martin Dempsey has claimed that in the case of an escalation of unrest in Crimea, the U.S. Army is ready to back up Ukraine and its allies in Europe with military action. According to the website of the Atlantic Council, Dempsey said that he's been talking to his military counterparts in Russia, but he's also sending a clear message to Ukraine and members of NATO that the U.S. military will respond militarily if necessary.
The Russians have repeatedly accused the United States government of interfering in Ukraine's politics.
I wanted to go to part of the recording, the intercepted phone conversation between the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piet, and Victoria Nuland, the top U.S. diplomat for Europe.
Good. So I don't think Cleach should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking, in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, you know, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Cleach and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, you know. I just think Cleach going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
So that's Victoria Nuland speaking to, and Victoria Nuland's the top U.S. diplomat for Europe, speaking to the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piet. And that conversation, to the shock of many, ended up on YouTube. Not clear who hacked that phone conversation.
You don't have to be paranoid to be a Russian and say, now, wait a second. Here's this conversation. I'd say it's a very telling conversation. It goes on to say, this fellow Yatsenyuk, he knows about economics. He used to be head of the central bank. Used to be head of the central bank. Used to be head of the central bank. Used to be head of the central bank.
Что может послужить поводом для использования вооруженных сил? Это, конечно, крайний случай. Но просто крайний. Зимой, в холодное время суток, если мы увидим, что этот беспредел начинается в восточных регионах, если люди попросят нас о помощи, а официальное обращение действующего легитимного президента у нас уже есть, то мы оставляем за собой право использовать все имеющиеся средства для защиты этих граждан. Мы считали, считаем и будем считать, что Украина наш не только ближайший сосед, а действительно наша братская республика, соседняя. А наши вооруженные силы – это товарищи по оружию, друзья. Многие из них знают друг друга
Why does
лично.
Russia care? Let's look at this next map. We've heard a lot about Sevastopol. This is the Black Sea Fleet for the Russians. It's their only warm water port. All their ports up here in wintertime, often not accessible. And this one here is so key because it gives them access to the Mediterranean and then out to the Atlantic here. And this is the key national security for interest, really, when it comes to Ukraine and Crimea. And that's why when those 6,000 troops first moved into the Crimea, this is where they went first, right around Sevastopol. And it shows this is a key issue. It's not just for the West.
The Kremlin's media czar on Russian state TV has threatened the United States with a nuclear strike in his news broadcast, which was aired at the same time as polls closed in the Crimean referendum about secession from Ukraine. The remarks by Dmitry Kiselyov on Russia's main state broadcaster came as the United States said it would not recognize the referendum result and threaten further sanctions. Kiselyov is known for elaborate acid diatribes against the West. His weekly news program is watched for clues to Kremlin policy and signs of how the government wants Russians to perceive events. Kiselyov is widely regarded as a loyalist of Russian President Vladimir Putin, who in February appointed him to take over Russia Today news agency, a media organization intended to polish Russia's image.
The whole country of Ukraine is pretty divided right now, and I want you to explain to our viewers how that unfolds.
No question. You can see it right here in the map. Here is eastern Ukraine bordering Russia. These are the percentages of ethnic Russians speaking. Here, 75% speak Russian, ethnic Russian. Here, 75%. Here, all over 50%. Once you get into the western part of Ukraine, bordering, remember these NATO allies here, here, and here. We're looking at only 5% ethnic Russian up here in the western parts of Ukraine, and that is also reflected in the pull between East and West. Many people here feel the pull towards Russia, deep cultural, historic ties, language ties. Many here feel the pull towards the EU and the West, and we've seen that reflected in their elections as well. In 2010, when voters went to the polls, this part of the country voted for the pro-Russian candidate, Viktor Yanukovych. This part of the country voted for the pro-European candidate, Yulia Tymoshenko, who until a week ago was in prison.
И я уверен, и хочу это быть уверен, что украинские военнослужащие и российские военнослужащие будут не по разные стороны баррикад, а по одну сторону баррикад. Меня это не беспокоит, потому что мы не собираемся и не будем воевать с украинским народом. Если мы примем такое решение только для защиты украинских граждан, и пускай попробует кто-то из числа военнослужащих стрелять в своих людей, за которыми мы будем стоять сзади, не впереди, а сзади. Пускай они попробуют стрелять в женщин и детей. Я посмотрю на тех, кто отдаст такой приказ на Украине.
Я бы нашла, как замочить этих мудаков. И я надеюсь, что я включу все свои связи, и я подниму весь мир, как только смогу, для того, чтобы, просто от этой России не осталось даже выжженного поля.
Вот мы сегодня говорили, это утром было совещание глав фракций, и потом я с Виктором говорил, Витя говорит, а что теперь делать оставшимся 8 миллионам русских, которые остались на территории Украины? Они же изгои.
Их расстреливать из атомного оружия.
If the events of this past week were to communicate one thing loud and clear, it is that the time for Glass-Steagall, national banking, and NWAPA has come. But with Barack Obama in the White House, the time that still exists to enact those policies may be swiftly cut short by the thermonuclear conflict with Russia that Obama is committed to. Just yesterday, Russian Prime Minister Medvedev warned unequivocally that nations seeking to usurp the national sovereignty of any nation, especially theirs, that nuclear war is indeed on the table for any such violation.
Это реалии, с которыми мы все должны считаться. И государственной власти придется дать на этот запрос свой, надеюсь, эффективный ответ. Доктрина государственного суверенитета. Она не должна размываться, даже если это удобно для достижения каких-то текущих политических целей. Вплоть до цели избраться на соответствующую позицию. Это просто опасно для мирового порядка. А примеров посягательств на доктрину суверенитета в последние годы было очень немало. Чего стоят и военные операции против иностранных государств в обход Организации Объединенных Наций, заявление о том, что тот или иной политический режим потерял легитимность, причем заявление со стороны иностранных государств, а не со стороны народа соответствующей страны, введение всяческих коллективных санкций в обход международных институтов. Все это не улучшает ситуацию в мире, а последствия скоропалительных военных операций в иностранных государствах обычно заканчиваются одним – приходом к власти радикалов. Я уже не говорю, что в какой-нибудь момент такие действия, которые подрывают государственный суверенитет, могут закончиться вполне себе такой полноценной региональной войной. И даже, никого не хочу пугать, с применением ядерного оружия. Об этом должны помнить все.
This statement is an obvious message directed to the Obama administration indirectly and the financial power that controls it. Since the illegal war launched in Libya last year and even the more unlawful assassination of Muammar Gaddafi, the administration has done nothing but show a disgusting abuse of executive power and criminal disregard for domestic and international law, a disregard that nations like Russia and even high-level U.S. military officials view as threats to national sovereignty. Russia has repeatedly stated that is the issue over military intervention in Syria and Iran. Sovereignty. That is the issue at stake with all the threats occurring at this point. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, it's what's at stake with the joint U.S.-NATO anti-ballistic missile system being built in Europe aimed at Russia. Despite Obama's irrational commitment to war, saner elements in the United States have mounted in and around the U.S. military. Specifically, Representative Walter Jones, in his push for legislation H.C.R. 107, declares that any president who launches war without congressional approval would be immediately subject to impeachment. This was followed by Senator Jim Webb in a restatement he made on the same point in the Senate in his piece of legislation S. 3176 to try to stop a preemptive illegal war. So far, they stand virtually alone, and that in and of itself increases the danger of nuclear war. While Jones's and Webb's legislation is despicably still outstanding in both houses of Congress, the U.S. House of Representatives has passed a resolution on Iran that moves the United States much closer to a war footing against Iran. And as many experts and diplomats like Dan Shapiro, the envoy to Israel from the United States, warn, America is ready to attack. The non-binding resolution H.R. 568 that overwhelmingly passed 401 to 11 effectively calls for a military attack on Iran when it obtains nuclear weapons capability. The vague interpretation already applies to Iran and actually any other country with a civilian nuclear program, and comes at a time when Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak is actively urging the international community to increase pressure on Syria, as he says, to strike a further blow to Iran. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former Chief of Staff for the Secretary of State Colin Powell, warned that this resolution reads like the same sheet music that got us into the Iraq War and could be the precursor for a war with Iran. It's effectively a thinly disguised effort to bless war. General Wilkerson is right, and if his and others' warnings are not heeded, whether it's concerning Iran, Syria, or Russia directly, the United States will have violated the rights of a sovereign nation, whose consequences was spelled out by Medvedev yesterday. Those consequences being a thermonuclear war, threatening the annihilation of the entire human species. That is President Obama's commitment. Therefore, there is no discussion of war avoidance policy that does not include removing Barack Obama from office. We have been warned, and the way things are looking now, we will not get another one.
The British Empire's game, run through U.S. President Barack Obama, has been called out by the Russian government. They do not want it, but if pushed, will go to war. It will be thermonuclear war. Therefore, what humanity faces in light of the Obama administration's go-ahead to make the ballistic missile defense system operational based on the completion of Phase 1 on May 20th is possible extinction. Is it inevitable? Only if Barack Obama is not taken out of power. Because if Obama succeeds in his mad drive to force Russia into thermonuclear confrontation, there can be no economic recovery, domestic or international. There will be, possibly, no humanity left on the face of this earth.
And we are trying to
Your life depends on the constitutional elimination of his power. Today, on May 17th, Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, in the presence of U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, reiterated Russia's position that the drive coming from the U.S., acting as the geopolitical muscle of the British royal family, can easily lead to nuclear confrontation. Medvedev stated, "There have been many recent examples of the concept of state sovereignty being undermined. Military operations against foreign states bypassing the United Nations, declarations of illegitimacy of certain political regimes. This does not improve the situation in the world, while rash military interference in the affairs of another state usually results in radicals coming to power. Such actions, which undermine state sovereignty, can easily lead to full-scale regional war, even, I am not trying to scare anyone here, with the use of nuclear weapons." Member of the LaRouche PAC endorsed national slate of congressional candidates, Keisha Rogers of the 22nd District of Texas, delivered a sharp message on May 15th while organizing on the ground in Texas that the threat of thermonuclear confrontation with Russia, which we just heard Medvedev warn about, can only be stopped with the nullifying of Obama's powers.
I will just say that the message that's being sent from Russia and from what we're seeing with the attempts and the drive toward World War III is very clear to Russia and very clear to our U.S. military. The solution is we have to get Obama out now. We have to stop this collapse. And everything that you have to put into this fight. Let's send a message, clear message to the White House. Obama must go. Let's take the nation back, and we can win this fight for mankind. Thank you.
As it stands, Barack Obama has been rejected by the American people. There is no response that will come from this administration on the collapse of the entire world financial system. All American citizens can expect from the Obama party is a showdown of thermonuclear confrontation with Russia. Do we wish to survive? That is the question. Don't simply tell yourself, yes, you want to live. Do what will enable us to live and implement the package to turn the situation around. Dump Obama. Dump him now.